Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show to talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of The Flash. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. This is the continuation of Armageddon. We're at part 3 now, where we finally get the insight of what Barry meant when he said injustice. Very much like playing homage to the Injustice video games, and the comics, as well as the now animated movie adaptation. But yeah, it's like Barry's like, we as the Justice League enacted a protocol in case any one of us ever went rogue. I don't know if that's necessarily because it never came up in the second game, because I don't know. I know the general story of the first game, but I don't know the ins and outs. So I don't know if that was already a protocol that existed in the Injustice the universe, because obviously the comics expand the lore even more. So I'm curious, like, was that ever like an official protocol, or is it just purely them doing an homage to it? Either way, I think that's so interesting. It's like that's what you're kind of doing your own version of Injustice, except if Superman was like, no, I need protocols put into place if I ever go rogue. I mean, that could still be the foundation of it, because, you know, Batman's always got protocols in place to take down the Justice League if he ever needs to. So the parallels are here of like, we're meant to do this. Like, if any one of us ever enacted the protocol Injustice, that we would help take that person down. And obviously, like, Jeff is like, but, you know, shouldn't the others be here? Kara, John, Sarah, like, it shouldn't just be on me. But it's like, for Barry, it's like, this is too important. Like, the fact of the matter is, if the word injustice is ever used, you would listen. Because Barry's scared, and he's like, right, he needs someone to take away his speed. But Jeff's like, if I do this, like, there's no going back from me. He's like, I know, but this is to stop myself. Because he's like, I didn't remember, like, Joe dying 6 months ago. And Jeff was like, wow, like, not even remembering your own father's death like that. Okay, because he's like, I'm not in the right mind space. Which I think is interesting, because Cecile's on the flip side of it, saying, like, right, Barry's going through something. He's having a mental day right now. Like, he's going through something mentally, because Barry was there when she was dealing with her own crisis, so she wants to, you know, help Barry too. And I think that's so interesting, because we did set that up with Cecile, you know, her backstory. Now we know, like, right, that's why she's trying to do this for Barry. But at the same time, Iris thinks Barry might not be crazy, because she looks at the footage because she got it like 6 months ago from Kristen, but it never, she never looked at it until she had her, like, she wouldn't want to see that, so she puts it in, and she points out, like, right, there's some missing footage of when Dad got hit by the train. Like, what if somebody did something? What if it was metahuman? But Cecile is like, I buried his body. Like, the fact of the matter is, like, why are you, like, reopening this wound? Like, you know how hard it's been for me to go forward. And Iris is like, obviously Iris is not trying to come at this from a perspective of, like, trying to hurt her, but it's like, because in Cecile's mind, it's like, it's almost like you're purposely I get you're trying to save Barry, but the fact of the matter is, opening this wound and kind of shoving Joe's death back into my face doesn't help with that. But Iris is just like, because if she believes that there's something larger going on at play here, because it is the thing of, Barry loses his job, we lose Star Labs, and now him not even remembering Joe's death. It's like, there's too many coincidences for this just to be a coincidence. There has to be more. But Cecile, like, really got amped up. And we kind of get an explanation for that later on, too, because for her, it's not only her own grief that she has to deal with. Because she is an empath, she's been dealing with Barry's grief, she's been dealing with Iris's grief. So it's like, you literally have to deal with the grief of 3 other people. So, like, for her, it's like, even if I wanted to, I can never forget about Joe. Not for 1 second of 1 hour of 1 day, because he's always on my mind, because being around Barry and Iris, I feel their grief, you know. So, like, on top of trying to deal with my own, I have to basically juggle 2 other people's griefs because of my powers, you know. It's kind of on the downside, the side effect of being an empath. And so Iris and Cecile go their separate ways when it comes to this. Chester and Caitlin help Cecile, while Allegra ends up helping Iris. So Iris wants to start back at the beginning with the train situation, and she goes and collects the footage, but it turns out, like, some of it was, like, gone, so she thinks there's something else there. But the guy's like, no, like, that typically happens when Shark Stadium is happening at the same time. We'll lose chunks of data. And he plays it over again, and Joe just straight up get hit. And so she just immediately shuts down. Like, no, I was wrong. I should have never asked. Because Allegra's like, is there another angle? Because at first she noticed something on the tracks, but she saw some particles going up. She's like, maybe it's just like I need to go to Dion for my treatment. So there's definitely, for her, it's like something's definitely going on here. And so she at first was just thinking it was her sickness, so she didn't really think too much of it. It's like, right, I just need my treatment. So she was going to walk away. But then Allegra brings up, like, later on when Iris kind of walked away, it's like, no, you were right. There's something weird. Like, that train they said it was 15 minutes early. It's never early. It's like it was inspected 2 days ago, and then all of a sudden when Joe got hit, apparently it was because of some hydraulics failure. It's like, there's just too much stuff lining up that way, because it's like, did Joe just happen to have an unlucky day? Because like the person who just like, because didn't they keep saying like, oh, he took a wrong step? Like, didn't it look like the guy with the bag kind of like nudged him in that direction? That's why I'm like, are we not looking into that? Like, that seemed a little, because the guy who nudged him, I mean, maybe that's supposed to be the point of like the guy just nudged him and just kept walking. Like, it just seemed weird, and it seemed all. But Iris goes to the train station, and Dion comes to pop in, and she, just freezing everything, which I'm like, everyone related to the Speed Force and everything, you speedsters doing all the stuff that you do. Well, you're a speed god, essentially. You're a force, but still. But I thought it was so interesting when it's all said and done, Dion's trying to give her a treatment, but she's like, no, like, I actually need it taken away, because the thing Allegra couldn't see, Iris could, because she's in a very unique position that she can see things because of her situation is actually armed her for to be the perfect enemy to this, because I guess whatever changes were made to this timeline, she seemed like like it breaking apart to some extent, because her sickness basically disjoints her across the timelines. So she's seeing like things aren't right. Like, because of that, she's able to see something no one else would be able to, because Dion couldn't see it until like he snapped away her all that he had done to basically get her better. Like, he did undo all his work, and then he touches her and he starts viewing things from her point of view. It's basically negative still force. So I'm guessing, and maybe this is what's going to end up happening, someone is basically taking the negatives of all the other forces. I mean, we know the negative speed force can be used. That's what Eobard was using, and he was trying to get Nora to use it. So the inverse could exist for the other forces as well. So someone has basically been using the negative still force, meaning someone went into the past and they changed things, and they're trying to make it seem like nothing else. And that's why, and the whole point was to make Barry seem insane. Like, everything was orchestrated to make that happen, because it's like, yeah, it's a little too much happening here and there, which we'll circle back to that, because at the same time we have the Cecile situation. They're trying to figure out a way that, like, Cecile's going to try and track down Barry, but it's like, because they already know Despero is, because Cecile can feel his power. So Cecile's like, I know Barry better than anyone, so I'll be able to pinpoint his location. But the problem is, Despero is, his brain has 4 quadrants instead of a human brain, which only has 2. So even if Cecile got maxed up power, it still wouldn't be enough to find Barry. So she needs someone else's help. So lo and behold, who does she turn to? Top, who is kind of like, oh, like, I'm going to help you find your lightning fast hero. No thanks. Because just because he went all bad, you're trying to find your hero. And she's like, right. How about it's a quid pro quo situation. You help me out, I get some of those restraints removed from you. So some of your limitations. So it's like, right. Unlikely allies having to work together, especially because it's like, she's like, how can I trust you after the last time you messed with my head? It's like, well, to be fair, you were trying to mess with her head first, so it's a little pot calling the kettle black type of thing, but essentially Chester even said to himself, like, oh, you want me to make you like a garage-based Cerebro? And he essentially does. And so they are able to pinpoint Barry's location at first, but like Top had to convince Cecile to bury her emotions. Like, forget about your dead boyfriend. You're letting your emotions control you. Bury it. And just like I cut away, I got over like my man that I had. It's like, you do the same. Like, it's not important. Like, focus on like what you need to do. But Chester needed time to recalibrate everything and fix everything after they like overloaded it. But Caitlin talked to Cecile about the fact is don't bury Joe. Your powers are at their strongest because it's not you as an empath. It must suck, you know? Because also, like, you know, Caitlin's coming from a position like, I know exactly what you're going through. What I felt like when Ronnie... What I thought was interesting, though, is what she said. Her line of, like, when Ronnie died from the particle accelerator, which I'm like, I guess she's not going into the ins and outs of, like... Because I'm like, whoa... I'm like, I think the Firestorm thing is exactly the same post-crisis. Not unless that's supposed to be indicative that worked out a little differently. Not unless it's suggesting that... I don't know. I would assume that, especially because Ronnie helped Barry out with the whole thing at the end of season 1. I mean, that's how Ronnie died the second time. Well, quote-unquote died, but... well, he actually died this time, you know? But the fact that she specifically mentioned the particle accelerator, I was like, that's interesting. Because why not mention when he actually died? So that seemed specifically worded that way because that seems like that might be a post-crisis thing. Not unless that was like a Flashpoint thing that continued to be a post-crisis thing. Like, once again, the timeline has shifted so many times, it's hard to say. They throw in little things here and there to let you know, like, oh, what's actually stayed the same and what hasn't. So that seemed very particular. Like I said, why choose that? Because he didn't die then. But I guess it's like she was using an example because that's when she was at her, like, most heartbroken. She kind of... I mean, I figured him dying again, like, after you guys got, I think, finally married, wasn't it? That would be the reference she would make and not specifically when you thought he died during the particle accelerator. So, like I said, that might be me overthinking things, but that seems like it's like no, like that's specifically to tell you, yeah, that things played out for Ronnie's story quite differently in its post-crisis. Which is kind of sucky because if that is the case, that's got to be harsh knowing that you did have time with him but still ended up losing. That's why I'm like, maybe they specifically... I don't know how... I keep interpreting that too many different ways in my head. But, so she knows exactly what Cecile is going through, losing the person you love like that. And so she's telling Cecile to not, like, give up on her feelings, like, actually dive into them and use them, and because that's what's going to fuel her power as an empath, is embracing her feelings, not burying them. Because doing that is just you running away from it. You know, the fear is what's driving you. And that seems to be the biggest indicator of this episode, is that fear is kind of driving a lot of motives. But we'll get to that in a bit. But Cecile and Top tried to do their thing, especially when Despero decided, like, oh, you guys are trying to get a power boost? Don't worry, I'm going to get one too. So he has the people there on guard, like the FBI or whatever, there to, like, basically kill themselves. And then he had them turn on the particle accelerator and he absorbed the energy from it to boost his own powers. So he comes to visit them. And I love that Top does a vertigo thing and knocks Chester and Caitlin out, but then it was immediately like, all right, Despero, let's make a deal. I'll show you where the Flash is, and together you and I can kill. It's like, what made you think I came here to bargain? Dormammu, I came here to bargain. It just made me think of that. But I love that he's like, what made you think I was going? And she's like, well, I'll give you the information for free. He's like, oh, you will, when I forcibly take it from you, and basically almost killed her in the process. And he tried to do the same thing to Cecile because he only got half the location from Top. But Cecile, he's like, oh, you're all alone. She's like, I'm not alone. I'm never alone. And she taps into her powers, like her feelings for Joe. And that made her be able to push him back. But even in that moment, he was like, yeah, you're powerful for a human empath. But the fire Patara is like too strong for you to go up against. And in that moment, like, she pushed him back, luckily. So luckily they were able to get Top to like a hospital before she died. I'm like, yeah. Next time, Cecile's not going to be so trusting of you because it's like, yeah, when the time came, you tried to kill a family member of mine, so bump you. I'm not going to you for help anytime soon. So, plus, you should also be grateful. Not only did I help save your life, too, so there's that element, too. But they ended up tracking out where Barry is, and they're trying to get there before Despero does. So, there's all of that. Now, finally circling back to the Jeff and Barry thing, I thought was fascinating. Was like, obviously, Barry's working on a conduit, and he turns on some music, and it's like, I don't look at him being like, oh, you're trying to impress me. He's like, yeah, this is what Joe would listen to, you know, so I wanted to play one of his favorites. And obviously for Jeff, you know, obviously he doesn't, because I think the direct parallel would have been his dad, but specifically from the cop angle, it's like, right, I know what you're lost, because he knows his dad, the loss of his dad has been a big motivator for him. I mean, both him and Barry are in the sadly dead dads club, so that in that moment, he talked about Henderson, though. It's like, yeah, I lost, my best friend. We had our ups and downs, but he was a good guy. He sacrificed himself to save my life, And so he's like, I know that Joe would be, he didn't really know Joe, but he's like, I know, he would be so proud of you, who you've always been all along. And then in that moment, he's just thinking about, what the future holds for him. And it's just kind of no, Joe wouldn't be, he doesn't say anything, but he's got that look of, Joe wouldn't like who I've become. I know he wouldn't because of what I'm going to end up doing. So he ended up affecting Jeff's suit. He's like, right, with your electricity, you'll be able to cut my connection to the Speed Force. And, Jeff is like, this is going to hurt. And Barry's like, I know. And so Jeff keeps going and going. But then, he's like, maybe we should take a break. And Barry's like, no, we have to do this. He's like, is there something you're not telling me? And it's like, Barry's like, 10 years from, who was this Despero fellow? He's from the future. He told me 10 years from now I'm going to show the world. It's like, and you actually believe him? It's like, I've seen it. I know it. This is my only way to protect everyone I care about. But for Jeff, it's like, I'm not going to strip the world of one of its greatest protectors. Because that's not who you are. You've proven yourself time and time again to be the man that I know. He's like, the fact is that nothing's set in stone. Remember the circumstances we met under Crisis? You were supposed to die then. You changed your future. You can change this. But for Barry, it's like, I'm already hurting people. This is, if I can take away my powers, then maybe I can prevent the future Despero Saul, Because for him, it's like, I'm trying to save everyone's lives because I will destroy this world. I'm trying to protect the people I love. And Jeff is still trying to walk away being trying to figure something else out. But Barry's like, what about your family? This is about protecting your family too. And Jeff is like, keep my family out your mouth. And he's just like, and Barry starts charging up and he's like, if you won't do I'm asking you to do what's necessary, and just throws a bolt of lightning at him. And it's like, either we've already started this, and he's like, one way or another, we're going to finish this. And you're like, yo, because Barry's like, did you just see what that power did? Even with how much power I have left, what I could do, the people I could hurt, I need to be stopped. And even Jeff was like, let's end this craziness as they duked it out, especially because Barry tried to throw lightning, and someone's like, you're going to throw lightning against the lightning guy? Bring it. So Jeff just grabs it and redirects it. I wonder, would Jeff be able to necessarily because I think Jeff's lightning could charge. It is different electricity, so it wouldn't work the same way as this, because what's being drawn from him is the Speed Force specifically. So I don't know if Jeff would be able to absorb that electricity, or would that take a toll on him. It probably wouldn't be able to just straight up convert to lightning, but he's able, because it is lightning regardless, and he is able to redirect it. And it's like, yeah, I think that belongs to you, and you should keep it. And Barry just grabs Jeff, and he's just like, this has to keep, and just zooms him all over the place. And then they end up crashing into the statue meant to honor Oliver. And in that moment, Barry's just kind of and for Jeff, it's I've never met the man, but Oliver Queen sacrificed himself for you. He made a deal with the Monitor. What for? To save your life, because he believed that you were the best of us, And Oliver Queen wasn't a quitter, so you quitting now is, you weren't a quitter before. Neither one of us are quitters, so don't quit now. Oliver Queen didn't quit on you, so don't quit on yourself. And I love it. I love those moments. It's where is the future right now? Whose is it? Mine. Whose life is it? Mine. And what are you going to do? What are you going to do with it? Live it by any means. And I'm like, yeah! It's just those lines are so good. Oh, it's so good. And just when they use it too, it's so damn impactful, because he brought it up before, but he had to stick it into Barry's head this time, and he's like, I'm sorry. It's just Barry just was so desperate. He was driven by fear. Even though he was saying oh, I'm not acting out of fear, I'm trying to save people's life. But it's no, everyone's acting out of fear in this situation, because no one knows what's going on. But in that moment, Despero shows up to finish Barry, to kill Barry. And Iris shows up with Dion and is like, no, someone's changed the timeline. I love the fact is that Despero is like, oh, that's funny. Because I'm wondering, does his powers allow him to see if time has really been altered? I mean, because even Dion was like, I couldn't, to him, Joe was supposed to die, because it's just like that's the way time flows. But it's like, oh, in actuality, someone altered time. He's like, using the negative still force, he's like, I couldn't even tell the difference. Like, someone had hid it from him. So, like, I don't know why, I guess Despero's third eye can see so much that, I guess, because it's also like, right, you're his wife. Of course you're going to try and cover for him. But, Dion gave him the necessary juice to get to the future, because for him it's like, right, I've got to find out who's actually responsible for this, because he took Despero at his worst, because like, why would Despero lie, you know? And so, but it's also that everyone's being manipulated, and so Jeff kind of holds him back in time, but also just, Barry does get away, and he's like, right, you've just destroyed the world, you know, you just killed everyone, and he bounces. And so that's definitely going to be interesting to see present day Team Flash when they actually meet up again, what that situation looks like, especially because Barry ends up in 2031. I'm like, you probably don't want to be running around as a Flash either. So luckily, he goes to a West party, and lo and behold, who's there? Ryan, Allegra, Chester with his hair grown out, Cecile, home dude on the far right. I'm like, I know you, I just don't know where I know you from. Like, who is he again? And then there's like Ryan, once again, I think that's his name, the Paragon of Humanity. Once again, I always think that's so interesting when people are just in, because like, it was just in Nancy Drew like a couple episodes ago, because he was playing George's dad. Just, I mean, specifically stuff running parallel at the same time, considering there's also another Nancy Drew connection, and that's the actress who plays Kristen. She also plays Hannah, so I'm like, that stuff is always fascinating to me. Tangents and all that aside, Barry shows up there, and lo and behold, we got Tom Cavanaugh back. I was like, oh, that's interesting. I mean, to be fair, Carlos returned for like the season finale of The Flash. So it's like, it makes, making one final appearance, but it's like, oh, surprise. But it's like, yeah, it's not like in a full capacity, it's more of a guest starring role. But I'm like, which one is that? And I was like, I can only assume that's Eobard, especially because he makes the reference of like, never know what face the future's going to show you. And he's there, and he's getting married to Iris, and you're like, what twisted reality is this, that you two are getting married? And in that moment, like, the moment everyone turns and sees Barry, like, Iris is kind of scared, and even Ryan's like, why is he here? Oh, I forgot, Alex is there too, like, don't forget. I'm like, yo, the entire squad's, and Barry's almost like, what kind of twisted reality though? So I guess this is the future that Despero came from, the one that's been twisted and altered. So that's definitely going to be interesting. If he has to be explained, like, no, I'm Barry from the past. Like, what's going on here? Like, maybe how Kara was able to reach out to Alex in Elseworlds. Maybe kind of in a similar regard, maybe that's going to be the same thing applicable to like Barry reaching out to Iris in this particular regard. But yeah, things are definitely awkward. Like, all your friends and allies are looking at you like you're the worst. So once again, like, this is specifically the future that was altered he's going to, because Iris and Dion are going to explain to the others like, no, there's something going up here. Someone changed the timeline. Something's wrong here. So at the core of it, it has to be Eobard, because he already utilized the negative force, and now that other forces exist, he's just manipulating them for his own means, because the best way to destroy Barry Allen would to basically turn every one of his friends and allies against him, but also taking his wife from him in this regard to be like, oh, it's the sweetest revenge. Like, this is definitely an Eobard play, so just like, it's so interesting because like it's a little bit of an inverse because once again, to my knowledge, and I think I might have referenced this before, to my knowledge in the comics, and this is just purely based on the Flashpoint Paradox Justice League animated adaptation, but like, I think initially Barry thought Eobard calls Flashpoint, when in actuality, at the end of it, spoiler, well, it's not really a spoiler, he found out he's the one that calls Flashpoint. He just didn't remember it. So I think maybe this is supposed to be kind of tugging in that direction where it's like, no, Eobard did. Like, he's responsible for Armageddon. Did he take on Barry's face and cause a ruckus as the Flash? Or did he do something to actually manipulate Barry's mind and make him go deranged? Like, what actually happened? It's definitely going to be interesting to see where part 4 takes us with all of this. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. good day, and goodbye.